Something that's so important to understanding history, but that's so often underappreciated, is its physical environments, the spaces in which these historic events that we are studying actually took place. Not only, of course, in very literal terms, like, oh, the customs house was over here, and so the soldiers were positioned in this place, and they fired in that direction. I'm talking about the wider physical environments in which these people were living, the material conditions which led to their being who they were, doing what they did. Because events like the Boston Massacre were not just these isolated incidents between complete strangers, but indeed they were far more personal than you may ever have imagined before. And in fact, the way that all of these really early formative events leading up to the American War of Independence took place in Boston are more resembling of local small-town feuds than they are of the massive international political and military events which they ultimately led to. So in this video today, I want to take you on a little tour of my favorite American city. I want to go through Boston and talk about not what happened in Boston 250 years ago. I want to talk about where those things happened and what that scale, what that space tells us about those events. So I'm standing just outside of the Copp's Hill burying ground. Why just outside? Well, because I decided to begin my little tour today at around 6 a.m. and everything is closed. Now, why did I do that? Because I'm not a very smart person. But in any case, it's not really, we're not here for the burying ground itself, rather what it represents. You see, it is today, as it was back in the 18th century, more or less the northernmost point of the city of Boston. In fact, you can overlay its location back on an 18th century map, and you can see how perfectly it lines up. One rather interesting point about this location is it was actually where the British had some artillery positioned during the Battle of Bunker Hill, but this location isn't really what we're here to discuss today. So we're going to begin with a little bit of a walk to get a sense for the true scale of the city of Boston in the 18th century. It may look rather big on that map, but as you'll see fairly quickly, it really isn't. So in the 1770s, the population of Boston was around 16,000 people. And by 18th century standards, that was a major North American settlement. That was a bustling metropolis. It was a major port town. But of course, by today's standards, we would call that a very small town. It's not like everybody literally knows everybody else type small, but it's absolutely in the territory of something happens across on the other side of town, which incidentally is like a mile away or so, and everyone is going to hear about it pretty quickly. There can be a very close-knit sense of community in these sorts of environments. And of course, as we all know, by the late 1760s, the relationship of that very close-knit independently minded community with their government back over in Britain is not exactly on the greatest of terms. Parliament has been attempting to pass a variety of tax acts, trying to sort of gain a little bit of legislative control over the region, gain a little bit of revenue to help defray the cost of defending the New World colonies, etc., etc. It's not the story that we're here to tell, but the tensions aren't really the best. We're starting to get all this nasty no taxation without representation stuff. Smuggling is going crazy, and one instance of smuggling would lead to, well, a rather awkward time. And so we arrive here to Hancock's Wharf. Now here we come to the second spot on our little tour, and well, if I were standing here 250 years ago today, I would not be having a good time. And I don't just mean because I would have died in infancy, but because I would have had my feet wet. This was all water back in the day. I'm standing in the approximate location. It was more like down that a ways a little bit. I'll show you on both maps where I'm standing now and where the location was historically. But it was the location of Hancock's Wharf. John Hancock owned the place. The House of Hancock, a mighty trading company indeed. We always hear about John Hancock as just the guy what had the big signature, but he was in fact one of the, if not the outright, wealthiest men in all of Massachusetts and in New England.
How did he get so wealthy? Oh, well, it's a long story, but a big part of it was smuggling.
On the 9th of May, 1768, we have the Liberty Affair, which basically consists of one of John Hancock's ships, the Liberty, docking at his wharf. They officially report that the ship is carrying around 20 barrels of wine. Should be something closer to like over 100, but that's a very common tactic for smugglers, is you underreport what you're carrying, and then you pay a little bit of tax, but you can evade the vast majority of it. The customs officials report 20 barrels, and there's no problem, until about a week or so later, on the 17th of May, when HMS Romney, a British warship, arrives in Boston Harbor. Now feeling like they have a little bit more security, those same customs officials go to the Romney and they tell the captain, hey, that Hancock guy, yeah, he's smuggling. He actually held us captive, effectively forced us to underreport the number. We didn't say anything at the time because we were afraid, and you should go and take care of that. But when all of these locals in Boston, again, small town, and they see this Royal Navy ship lowering a boat, they're not thinking, oh, they're going to confiscate a smuggler's ship. The word rapidly spreads through town that they are there to impress some more sailors. The crew of the Romney was a little short. Everyone knew this. They needed more men. Well, what better way than to conk a few sailors over the head and drag them aboard forcibly? Now, over in England, the legality of impressment was really quite clear-cut. But in the New World, was it legal for the Royal Navy to impress sailors? It gets a little dodgier. Word rapidly spreads, and a large crowd begins forming on the wharf. That crowd ultimately turns to violence, and we have something called the Liberty Riot on the 10th of June, 1768, about a month after the initial Liberty Affair.
Point is, the city of Boston used to be really quite tiny. And you know what else is really tiny? Is this video's sponsor, Raycon. Just last July, Raycon decided to bring back a classic. Literally, it is their everyday earbuds classic model, now featuring active noise cancellation that makes them the perfect listening devices, whether you're on a noisy commute into Boston, on a busy tourist-filled street, or just trying to ignore all of the locals screaming at you to open fire, when you're only trying to stand sentry duty outside the customs house. Maybe the train journey down to Boston's a little bit more relatable there, but you get the idea. Unlike many other earbuds, these are actually quite comfortable to wear, and they last for up to 8 hours of playtime, which is plenty of time for putting some dirty Colonials in their place, or for a morning train commute. And with their noise cancellation, you won't even notice their pleas for mercy, their loud conversations. And then when you need to recharge them, you just pop them right back into the little carrying case here, which in and of itself, incidentally, has a battery life of up to 32 hours. They are very easy to wear. They're very convenient to carry around with you, just, put it into a pocket or something. And of course, their audio quality is fantastic. They're enough to rival the bigger brands, but at the same time, these Raycons are far more affordable. And on that note, if you'd like to pick up a pair for yourself, you can visit buyraycon.com/brandsandf to get up to 20% off of your everyday earbuds classic today. And remember that when you support the channel's sponsors, you support the channel itself as well. So thank you to Raycon for sponsoring this video, and now let us return to the city.
And now in response to that rioting and a variety of other similar events that have been taking place for a long time now, the British government decides, right, enough is enough, we are going to commit troops. So 4 months after the Liberty Riot, on the 1st of October, 1768, 4,000 regular troops parade down Long Wharf, there to occupy the city of Boston and enforce the Crown's order. Now think about that number. 4,000 soldiers. It's often told independent of any other factors. Now, that sounds like a good number of soldiers, but this is over a domestic population of just 16,000 people. So you can imagine looking at this footage, and this is what I tell people all the time whenever I give a tour of Boston, look all around at all the people surrounding. Imagine if 1 in every 5 of them was a soldier. A modern equivalent in terms of occupation numbers would be if 2 million soldiers were to march into New York City or into London. And here upon the long wharf they formed and marched with insolent parade, according to a certain Mr. Revere, with drums beating, fifes playing, and colors flying. He described the number of warships in the harbor as pointing their guns at the city as if ready to bring it to a siege, if not to outright level it with the amount of firepower they then offered. And these soldiers, when they arrived in Boston, weren't just going on patrol. They weren't just having their morning inspections and parades, although obviously that was a very major part of military life. Instead, alongside the fact that all of these soldiers are going to need housing, and for the most part they're going to be encamped on the town green, which just overnight transforms into a military encampment, and well, you can't really use large sections of the green anymore. Alongside that, naturally, they are taking up economic space. They're not getting food shipments and equipment shipments, linen for clothing and whatnot from England. They're going to be procuring all of those things locally. And all of a sudden, there's going to be massive, just overnight increased demand on the bread shops and on the butcher shops, right? On the linen merchants. These individuals now have a clientele that has expanded by, 25%. It's a 25% increase for the population of Boston. Again, practically overnight. A new population suddenly taking up that kind of economic space, it's going to result in tensions. It's going to result in shifts to social dynamics, which some people may win out on, but some people will lose on. And perhaps the most significant of these factors is that within the British Army, it was permissible, even expected, that a soldier, so long as he's able to accomplish all of his formal military duties, all of his sentry duty, all of his, fatigue duties, etc., well, he might supplement his wages, earn a little extra beer money, basically on the side, by taking up local employment. A lot of these soldiers might have been weavers in their past life. They may have been cobblers. They may have been tailors. In fact, they could be doing those same jobs within the army as it is. And if you can take up extra work on the side with the locals, well, like I said, just earn a little bit of extra money on the side, right? Very common thing to have happen. Not only are they taking up resources, they're competing even in the job market. If tensions were bad for purely political reasons prior to the Army's occupation of Boston, now we have social tensions of an extraordinary scale being added onto it all. Now, a good number of those soldiers were actually removed in 1769, but the tensions continue to rise. And on the 22nd of February, 1770, there's an incident in Boston that doesn't even involve the army at all, but it speaks to just how intensely those tensions, those passions are rising in the city. The long and short of it is that certain, shall we say, patriotic individuals, people like the Sons of Liberty, have taken to going around to those businesses and those persons whom will engage with the military and whom will engage with trade with the homeland. And they will post signs and labels on their doors and in their windows, basically saying, hey, this person is a traitor to our cause, they support England, they don't support us, and woe betide those who support them. And sometimes posting signs would grow even more intense. We would on occasion see demonstrations, protests, even rioting in front of shops and homes of notable loyalists. And on one instance, again, I'm going to gloss over a lot of the details here, but the long and short of it is that there was a customs officer, Ebenezer Richardson, who came across one of these riots in which he saw people throwing stones through the windows of one of his compatriots who was a loyalist. And again, this guy works for the customs office, so everyone knows what side he's on, right? Well, Richardson tries to disperse the crowd, tries to get them to leave and whatnot. And Long and short of it, they sort of pursue him a little bit. He starts getting afraid. He winds up pulling out a gun, and he shoots into the crowd in a last-ditch effort to get them to disperse. And of course, who of all people does he wind up hitting? It's going to be an 11-year-old child named Christopher Sider. This is a big, big deal. Samuel Adams, another prominent local Bostonian who is very much not a loyalist, he decides to put on the funeral. Out of that total 16,000 people who live in Boston, 2,000 of them are in attendance of this funeral. And that kind of anger, that kind of rage, that kind of frustration doesn't just go away.
Welcome now to Post Office Square, a site which is also usually much busier than this. But in the 18th century, this site was very, very different. We are walking approximately, very roughly at the location of what once was Gray's Ropewalks. Again, very, very roughly speaking. Now, only around a week or so after the death of Christopher Sider, an event happens here that is honestly one of the most significant in the early history of the American War of Independence, and yet it's one that you probably haven't heard of. It was a brawl between British soldiers and local Bostonians, rope makers for the most part, as you'd expect. The long and short of it, once again, is that one day a soldier is walking by this area. Depending on what the account that you're reading is, there are a variety of reasons why he may be going by this area, probably to fetch some water, something like that. And some of the local rope makers sort of accost him, and they shout out, say, hey, Redcoat, I have a job for you if you're looking for work. So the Redcoat says back, yeah, what do you got? I'm looking for work. And in response, the locals say, you can go out and clean my little house, which back in the day translates to something that is not quite so polite. And a great big brawl breaks out, basically. There is a massive basically day of rioting in the streets, of violence, of not quite military versus civilian, but military men in their own personal capacity settling a score. This happens, I probably mentioned before, but on the 2nd of March, 1770. And just 3 days later, on the 5th of March, 1770, an event takes place that I know for a fact that you have heard of. And it happens just down the road. I'm pointing in that direction because I think it's in that direction. No, it's down that direction. Wherever it happens, it's just down the road.
On the 5th of March, 1770, Private Hugh White is standing sentry outside of the customs house. It is amidst this atmosphere of tension and of violence, active violence, of fighting and bloody brawling in the streets, and of rioting, active rioting, that he is standing that sentry. He's alone. It's cold. And he witnesses an altercation before him. One of his officers is walking by when an apprentice for a wig maker basically accosts the officer and says, "Hey, you owe my master some money. What's going on, guy?" And the officer, defending himself, says, "I already paid your master. Get on out of here," right? And of course, Private Hugh White sees this insolent Colonial chastising his officer for a debt that was already paid. He's not going to let that stand. He strides forward. He says, basically, don't speak that way to the officer. Resulting from their altercation, a crowd begins to form all around that sentry. They begin shouting him down. Sentry starts to get more scared. They begin throwing snowballs. They begin throwing ice and stones and even clubs at this sentry and daring him to shoot at the crowd. "Fire! Fire! You're a coward! Shoot us if you dare." Much like how that customs official shot down a boy just a few days ago. And of course, we all know how it ends.
What is now a very busy road next to a Bank of America used to be the rough location of the customs house, sort of the seat where all of those imperial taxes and levies and exports and blah, blah, blah are all being handled. It is right next to the old State House, back then just the State House, the town hall, now the old State House. This is the location of the Boston Massacre. Now, I'm not here to rehash the story of the Boston Massacre. It's one that you probably already are familiar with. But something that you may not know is that the first man who was killed in the Boston Massacre was named Samuel Gray. Now, there's no relation to the man who owned Gray's Ropewalks, that's just purely coincidental, but he was an employee. He worked at the Ropewalks, and he was present for that brawl, for that rioting. And what's more is that two of the soldiers who were present for the Boston Massacre were present during the brawl at Gray's Ropewalks just a few days prior. These weren't strangers to one another. These weren't complete outsiders, facing, just a faceless mob. These were individuals whom they, at least more or less on and off, right, whom they would have recognized. I'm hoping that you can hear me over the very loud truck. If you can't, I'll repeat it later. But they knew each other. 16,000 people. This was a small town. These were personal conflicts.
So before we wrap things up, I just want to take one more walk with you all to better show you that full scale of the colonial city. We'll go through the Common, basically all the way to the end there. And as we do so, I just want to clarify that I'm not saying that Boston was not a major city, an incredibly important city in terms of like the New England economy back in the 18th century, indeed in the economy of the entire New World. It was a major, bustling port city, right? And it was described as such. These people were not talking about it as if it were only a small town. But the important thing to remember then is that when an 18th century person is describing a bustling port city, they have a very different picture in their minds when compared with what we might imagine. And in order to understand how all of these events in early American history are connected, we need to understand the scale of where they took place.
And so we come to Stewart Street, just a little quick jaunt away from the Common. Now today, if I were to walk, across Stewart Street, down the road there, down, I think, Tremont Road, I just realized I'm standing in front of a restaurant with the windows, and so I'm going to move slightly forward as to be not awkward. Here we go, this is better. If you were to keep on going down that way, you would get city, and more city, and urban sprawl to your heart's content. But back again 250 years ago, it was very sparse, countryside, an increasingly narrow and narrower and narrower stretch of land, ultimately ending in the Boston Neck, that little, not peninsula, not island, little stretch, whatever, the only way to actually access the city of Boston by land. It was covered with fortifications, defenses, soldiers on garrison to guard against any incursion by Washington and his rabble just outside the way. And we are at the edge of the city. It gives you a really good sense of scale to appreciate just how small it was back in the day. Where I am standing now, compared with where we started just this morning, about an hour and a half ago or thereabouts, if you were to just go and do a straight walk, it's only about 1.3 miles. The city of Boston was very, very small. So with all of that, thank you everyone for watching. Of course, in particular, to my rather loud engine there. Of course, in particular, to my supporters on Patreon, by whom all of my work is made possible. I appreciate your patience, I appreciate your support, and I hope that you continue to appreciate for many, many days to come. The outros rather, are always much more long-winded when I don't have a script that I'm reading from. But in any case, however your support may come, whether it is financial or merely with your viewership, I appreciate it. Thank you all so much, and of course, until the next time, my dear viewer, I am, and I shall remain, if you can hear me, your most humble and obedient of servants.